There is a silence that screams louder than noise. There is a strength that grows not in excess, but in sacrifice. There is a woman who lives without sex and becomes not less, but infinitely more. Our age equates pleasure with purpose, indulgence with identity. But the soul was not made merely to feel, it was made to become. When a woman chooses to live without sex by circumstance or by sacred decision, something profound happens in the very architecture of her being. When a woman lives without sex, she is offered the sacred opportunity to rediscover the truth of her body, not as a commodity to be traded, flaunted, or exploited, but as a living cathedral carved by the hand of God. The world shouts from every corner, use your beauty, sell your curves, seduce to survive. Society has conditioned her to believe that her worth is transactional, that her body's value lies in its power to arouse, to attract, to acquire. And yet, when she steps back from the entanglement of sexual validation, she begins to hear a deeper voice, a divine whisper rising from within. She learns that her body is not a currency for male attention, nor is it a tool for momentary comfort. It is a temple not built by man, but formed in the secret place by a creator who etched eternity into her very frame. Her body is not an exhibit. It is a holy place, sacred, mysterious, and infinitely valuable, even when untouched. In this state of abstinence, either by choice or by circumstance, she rediscovers reverence. She no longer dresses to be consumed, but to honor. She no longer walks into a room asking, "Do they want me?" but stands in peace knowing, "I am already worthy." She reclaims her body from the altar of public opinion and places it on the altar of divine purpose. And as she walks through life with dignity not driven by the need to please, but by the call to remain pure, her very presence begins to challenge the culture. She becomes a living contradiction to the lie that a woman's power lies beneath her clothes. Her power, instead, rises from the fire of her self-restraint, the elegance of her silence, and the confidence of a woman who knows she cannot be bought because she already belongs. In a world that profanes what is sacred, she dares to be holy. In a time that sells the body cheap, she holds hers with priceless care. She is not less for what she withholds. She is more because she remembers who made her, and why. When a woman lives without sex, she does not become empty, she becomes spacious. Her soul, once occupied by the distractions of carnal longing or emotional attachment, begins to breathe again. The silence once feared becomes the sound of her own heart, rediscovering its rhythm. And in that silence, something begins to stir, not loneliness, but intimacy of a different kind. Freed from the emotional entanglements that often accompany physical intimacy, she begins to cultivate a deeper relationship with herself. She listens more closely to her thoughts, notices the subtleties of her emotional world, and confronts wounds she once tried to cover with affection. No longer distracted by the pursuit of validation, she sits with her inner child, comforts her inner critic, and reclaims her inner voice. She no longer reaches outward to be touched. She reaches inward to be healed. She begins to form bonds that are rooted in spirit, not skin. Friendships take on a deeper tone, not based on flirtation or emotional dependency, but on trust, truth, and shared purpose. She becomes more selective, not because she is cold, but because she has learned that intimacy without alignment is a form of self-betrayal. She learns to say no without guilt and yes without fear. Her boundaries sharpen, not to push people away, but to protect what is now holy within her. And in her solitude, she meets God in ways she never imagined. In prayer, she doesn't just speak, she listens. In stillness, she doesn't just wait, she becomes. In worship, she doesn't just sing, she surrenders. She discovers a companionship that transcends flesh, the nearness of the divine, the warmth of presence without demand, and the safety of being fully known without needing to be undressed. This form of intimacy is not sensual. It is sacred. It doesn't end in temporary closeness. It begins in eternal communion. And the love she finds there isn't dependent on performance, prettiness, or passion. It is unconditional. It is purifying. It is perfect. And so, she walks through the world not desperate for affection, but overflowing with a quiet fire. She doesn't need to be chased. She's already been found, not by a man, but by meaning, not by pleasure, but by peace. She lives without sex, but never without connection, because her soul, unshackled from lust, is now free to love more deeply, more wisely, and more truly than ever before. She gains the power to see clearly without the fog of infatuation. When the body is no longer stirred by desire, and the heart is not tangled in the thorns of romantic expectation, a woman begins to see not with her emotions, but with her discernment. She is no longer easily swayed by sweet words or fleeting glances. Her vision is no longer blurred by fantasies of what could be. It is sharpened by the truth of what is. She no longer mistakes intensity for intimacy. She no longer romanticizes red flags. She no longer confuses chemistry with character. Without the fog of infatuation, she can watch a man's actions instead of clinging to his promises. She can ask hard questions without fearing the answers. She can walk away, not because she's hard-hearted, but because her peace is too precious to gamble. Her standards rise not out of pride, but out of clarity. She sees that not every connection is a calling, not every attraction is a sign, not every spark should be followed. In this newfound stillness, she realizes how much of her past attention was fueled not by love, but by longing. The chase, the emotional high, the validation. It all mimicked connection, but left her emptier each time. Now she walks slower, speaks softer, listens deeper. Her spirit is no longer starving for attention. It's feasting on wisdom. She sees patterns, repeating cycles that once held her captive. She sees intentions, hidden beneath charisma. She sees herself, no longer through the lens of who desires her, but through the lens of who she's becoming. And most importantly, she sees God's hand, directing, protecting, revealing. This is the gift of restraint, not just the absence of physical intimacy, but the birth of spiritual sight. What once blinded her now refines her. And what once excited her now reveals itself as distraction. She sees clearly now, and because she sees clearly, she chooses differently. And because she chooses differently, she lives freely, not ruled by emotion, but guided by truth. Not led by impulse, but by purpose. Not deceived by appearances, but anchored in reality. And this is the quiet triumph of a woman who no longer follows the fog, but walks in the light. She is no longer driven by need, but called by vision. There was a time when the ache for closeness whispered louder than her wisdom, when the desire to be held, to be wanted, to be chosen, pressed upon her like a weight she could not shake. And in that hunger, she reached not always wisely, not always patiently, sometimes just to fill the silence, sometimes just to feel something. But when she lives without sex, something within her begins to shift. The needs that once screamed become still. The parts of her that once depended on affection for identity begin to mature. No longer led by lack, she is now led by clarity. No longer asking who will complete me, she now asks, what was I created to complete? She is no longer scrambling for love. She is standing in purpose. Her energy is no longer invested in proving her worth, but in producing fruit. Her longing is no longer to be desired, but to be effective. She wakes not with a question of who will text her back, but with a prayer of who she is called to bless. Her vision expands. She begins to dream dreams too big to be interrupted by temporary pleasure. She crafts a life so filled with purpose that it cannot be bargained away for momentary intimacy. Her time becomes sacred. Her peace becomes non-negotiable. Her mind is fixed not on who notices her, but on what God wants to build through her. And in that shift, from need to vision, she begins to live differently. She surrounds herself with people who challenge her, not just charm her. She protects her environment, not out of fear, but out of focus. She doesn't entertain relationships that distract her from her calling, because her calling is too costly to risk for chemistry. This kind of woman is dangerous to a culture that thrives on women being needy. She is the woman who doesn't chase, who doesn't cling, who doesn't collapse into anyone's arms just to feel enough, because she already knows who she is, and she knows where she's going. Her eyes are fixed. Her steps are ordered. Her mission is clear. She has left behind the prison of need, and she walks now with the power of purpose. She becomes dangerous in the most holy way. Not dangerous because she is loud or ruthless, not because she seeks control or demands attention, but because she is no longer easily moved, no longer seduced by surface-level praise, no longer captured by compliments that used to chain her. She becomes dangerous because the very things that once controlled her no longer have power. She is dangerous because she is no longer available to be used, drained, or distracted. She's not waiting to be saved, she's walking in the authority of someone already redeemed. She's not dressing for approval, she's clothed in strength and dignity. Her identity is no longer tied to how many eyes follow her, but to the one whose eyes never left her. The world doesn't quite know what to do with a woman like this, a woman who cannot be seduced by trends, who cannot be marketed to through insecurity, who cannot be lured by the illusion of worth through physical validation. She becomes a quiet rebellion to every lie that told her she had to offer her body to be seen, had to perform to be loved, had to submit to lesser treatment to be chosen. She is dangerous because her silence convicts, because her standards expose, because her confidence isn't loud, it's unshakable, because she can walk away from what others run toward simply because she sees what they don't. She becomes the kind of woman whose absence is felt more than her presence was ever acknowledged, the kind of woman who doesn't need to prove her value because her life speaks of it. She becomes a mirror not reflecting the desires of others, but exposing their intentions. And not everyone can stand in that reflection. Her power is not in how many hearts she can win, but in how few can shake hers. Her beauty isn't just in her face or her form, it's in her restraint, her resolve, her reverence. She has chosen the narrow road not because it's easy, but because it leads to life. And yes, she is dangerous not because she is trying to conquer anyone, but because she has finally conquered herself. She is a woman surrendered to God, yet unowned by the world. A woman who lives without sex, yet burns with purpose. A woman who is no longer playing to be desired, but destined to be remembered for her holiness, her wisdom, and her unwavering fire. To live without sex is not to live without love. It is to live without compromise. For the woman who walks that path not bitterly, but boldly, not in repression, but in reverence, not in fear, but in fierce faith, she will not be remembered for what she lacked, but for what she refused to lose, her soul.